I didn't think much of it when my mom told me she was going out of town for a work conference. She'd done it before, packed her little rolling suitcase, kissed me on the cheek, and left Mark, my stepdad, in charge of the house for a few days. I was 21, not a kid. It's not like I needed looking after, but she always said it the same way, with that slightly teasing smile. "Behave while I'm gone, boys." I usually just rolled my eyes and went back to whatever I was doing. Homework, editing, gaming, crashing early. Mark and I had an easy enough relationship. We weren't close, but we weren't distant either. He was solid, the kind of guy who fixed things without being asked and grilled on weekends like it was a personality trait. He wasn't my dad, and he never tried to be. I think we were both fine with that. But this time, things felt different. It started with small stuff. Mark was more talkative than usual. He'd crack open a beer and sit in the living room with me while I watched TV, even if it wasn't something he cared about. He asked questions about school, listened more, laughed at jokes that weren't even funny. Then came the second night. I was in my room, door mostly closed, scrolling on my phone, the glow of the screen lighting up my face. I heard him come home late. I figured he'd gone out with some work buddies or just needed some air. It was a Friday. Normal. Except he didn't go to bed. I heard the fridge open. The distinct clink of glass, the sound of a bottle cap flicked into the sink. Then silence. Then footsteps. Then my door creaked open. At first, I didn't even look up. I thought maybe he was just grabbing laundry or checking something. But the door didn't close. It opened wider, and I saw him standing there. Shirt rumpled, hair a little messy, a beer in one hand. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, blinking at the sudden light from the hallway. "Everything okay?" He shrugged, leaned against the doorframe. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." I nodded, expecting him to turn back around and head to his room. But he didn't. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. That's when something shifted. The air in the room felt tighter. He was looking at me differently, like he was debating something in his head. "I was just thinking," he said, slowly walking toward the edge of my bed. "It's weird how quiet the house is without your mom around." I smirked. "You miss her nagging already?" He let out a low laugh and sat on the edge of my bed, his back to me. "Maybe I just missed the noise." We sat there in silence for a moment, me half sitting up in bed, him staring at the floor. Then he said, without looking at me, "You mind if I hang here for a bit?" I hesitated. Yeah, sure, I guess." He nodded, as if that was the answer he'd been hoping for. And then, without asking again, he kicked off his shoes and laid down next to me. "You awake?" His voice was low, barely audible in the dark, just above a whisper, as if he was trying not to wake me, but still hoping I would hear. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice. And honestly, I wasn't sure what to say. My body had gone still, but my mind was racing. I could feel the warmth of him, could hear his breathing shift. Slower now, but deeper. He wasn't drunk in the falling over, slurring his words kind of way. It was something else. Something heavier, like all the walls he normally kept up had cracked open. The mattress dipped slightly as he turned onto his side. I felt his breath on the back of my neck. "You always been this quiet?" he asked, a little amused, a little something else. My heart was hammering. I still said nothing. Then I felt it, his fingers lightly brushing the fabric of my t-shirt near my shoulder. Just for a second, just enough to confirm it wasn't by accident. "Sorry," he muttered. "Didn't mean to freak you out." That was the moment I should have said something. I should have set a boundary. But instead, I turned slightly, just enough to glance back at him. He was looking at me. Really looking. Eyes not glassy anymore, just tired. And maybe, just maybe, something more than that. His face was close. Closer than it needed to be. The room felt way too small. "Did Mom call tonight?" I asked, breaking the silence. He shook his head. "No," she texted earlier. Said the conference was running late. She'll be back Sunday. So we still had 2 more days. He reached up and rubbed his jaw, letting out a sigh. You ever think about how weird life turns out? What do you mean? He paused, like he wasn't sure he wanted to say what was on his mind. Then he spoke anyway. I was married before. Twice. Thought I had it all figured out. Then your mom comes along, and I'm a stepdad to a grown man who barely talks to me. He chuckled softly, not bitter, just reflective. But I always noticed how you carried yourself. Quiet, but sharp, thoughtful. The compliment made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. Thanks, I said, voice barely a murmur. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. I don't know what I'm doing, man. I'm 46, and I still feel like a fucking idiot half the time. We lay there in silence after that. The kind of silence that's not uncomfortable, but charged. Like both of us were trying not to admit the same thing. I turned onto my back, accidentally brushing his arm with mine. He didn't move. In fact, he shifted a little closer. Not enough to touch me fully, but enough that I could feel the heat of him, his shoulder now just barely grazing mine. Then came the moment I still think about way too often. He said my name again. Softer this time. Hey. I turned my head toward him. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, quietly, he asked, Can I be honest with you about something? I hesitated, then nodded. He exhaled slowly. I shouldn't say this, but being around you this week, it's made me think about things I probably shouldn't be thinking about. My throat went dry. He kept going, voice quieter than ever. You ever feel something and you don't know if it's wrong or just unexpected? The air was heavy, too heavy, and all I could do was whisper, Yeah. He studied me for a long second, and then he reached over, slow, tentative, and let his hand rest gently on my chest, over the fabric of my shirt. His touch wasn't bold. It wasn't rushed, but it stayed there. And this time, he didn't take it away. I don't know how long we stayed like that, his hand on my chest, both of us barely breathing. It felt more like a quiet storm, the kind that builds slowly, humming just beneath the surface. His thumb moved slightly, brushing the cotton of my shirt in a soft, unconscious motion. My heartbeat thudded against his palm. I knew he could feel it. I think that was the point. Do you want me to stop? He asked, finally breaking the silence. I should have said yes. I should have told him to go back to his room and forget this ever happened. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, No. That one word changed everything. His hand slid up, slowly, until it rested near the base of my neck. His fingers didn't tighten. They just hovered there, warm and gentle. He leaned in a little, his face so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath again. But it didn't repulse me, it felt intimate. Too intimate. I don't know what I'm doing, he said, his voice barely audible. I just know I haven't stopped thinking about this since Monday night. I blinked. Since when? He looked down, embarrassed. That night you came out of the shower. You were wearing that towel. You said goodnight, and I swear to God, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. And it scared the shit out of me. The confession hit me harder than I expected. I remembered that night, how casually I'd said goodnight and walked past him. I hadn't thought anything of it. But he had. Mark, I said quietly, unsure what point I was about to make. This is. Yeah, he cut in. I know, messed up. I didn't say anything, because he wasn't wrong. This wasn't some fantasy. This was real life, my stepdad, the man who married my mom. And yet, there was something in his eyes, something raw and vulnerable that made me hesitate to shut it down. The room felt hot. My skin felt flushed. He looked at me again, and this time, his expression had shifted. Still uncertain, but laced with something deeper, something he wasn't sure he was allowed to want. I should leave, he murmured, finally pulling his hand back. And yet, he didn't move. Neither did I. Instead, I turned toward him, slowly, so we were lying face to face. His eyes flicked down, just for a second, then returned to mine. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Do you want to leave?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, with a sad half smile, he shook his head. "No." Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned forward, just an inch, and rested his forehead against mine. No kiss, no rush, just skin to skin. The contact was so simple, yet so charged that I felt dizzy. "I can't promise anything," he whispered. "I'm still trying to figure out what this even is." I closed my eyes. Me too. He stayed like that for a while, forehead pressed to mine, breathing slow and steady. Then he shifted again, laying back, eyes on the ceiling. I thought that was it, that maybe the moment had passed. But instead, he reached for my hand under the blanket and held it. And that was how we fell asleep. I woke up the next morning with his hand still in mine. For a moment, I wasn't sure it had even happened. The sunlight streaming through the blinds, the birds chirping outside, it all felt too normal, too innocent. But then I looked down and saw our fingers still lightly entwined. He was still asleep. His chest rose and fell slowly, his face softer in sleep than I'd ever seen it. That usual tension he carried in his jaw, in his shoulders, in the way he moved through the world, it was gone. He looked peaceful, vulnerable, like someone I hadn't really met until last night. I didn't move. I didn't want to wake him. And honestly, I didn't want to face what came next. The inevitable moment when he'd open his eyes, remember where he was, and panic. Maybe he'd pretend it never happened. Maybe he'd get angry, with himself, with me, with the alcohol. But that moment never came. Instead, when his eyes fluttered open a few minutes later, he blinked slowly, looked over at me and whispered, "Morning." His voice was hoarse from sleep. I expected him to let go of my hand, but he didn't. "Hey," I said, barely above a whisper. We just looked at each other for a moment, no words passing between us, but everything from the night before still hanging in the air. Finally, he sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. "I didn't mean to stay the whole night," he said. I didn't want to go." I sat up too, the sheets pooling around my waist. "I know." He looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. "This feels complicated." "It is." A pause. "But it doesn't feel wrong," he added, more to himself than to me. That made something in my chest loosen. He stood and stretched, the hem of his shirt lifting to reveal a sliver of toned stomach. "I should shower. Your mom's back in 2 days, right?" Reality, she existed. She was still his wife. And we were still whatever the hell we were. "Mark," I said before he left the room. He turned back, waiting. "What happens now?" He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know, but I don't regret last night, and I don't think you do either." And then he left. I sat there in silence for a long time after the door closed, trying to figure out how something so quiet, so unexpected could shake up everything I thought I understood about myself and about him. That morning passed in a blur. I stayed in my room longer than usual, avoiding the kitchen until I knew he'd finished breakfast. When I finally walked out, he was sitting on the patio, sipping coffee in a tank top and basketball shorts, staring out at the backyard. "You want some eggs?" he asked, without looking up. "Sure," I said. And just like that, we slipped back into the rhythm of normalcy. Except now there was something electric beneath the surface, something unspoken that neither of us dared touch yet. That night, I stayed up late, unsure of what to expect. And when the clock passed midnight, the door creaked open again. He stepped in quietly. No whiskey this time, just him, and he didn't say a word. He just climbed into bed beside me, pulled the covers over us both, and reached for my hand again. The second night was different. There was no alcohol on his breath, no excuses wrapped in slurred sentences. just silence and intention. When he reached for my hand, it wasn't shaky or uncertain. It was calm, steady, like he'd made peace with something in himself since the night before. Neither of us said a word. We just lay there, our fingers laced loosely between us. The only sound in the room, the hum of the ceiling fan overhead. And yet the silence felt full, loaded with everything we weren't saying. After a while, he shifted closer, our arms brushed, then our thighs, then his shoulder rested against mine. I thought he might stop there, but then his voice, low and quiet, broke the silence. I've never done this before. Done what? I asked. Felt this way, about a guy, about you. My breath caught in my throat. He kept going, his words slow, thoughtful. I always figured I had my life figured out. Work, marriage, routine. I never even let myself consider anything outside that. Until this week. I turned to look at him, but he kept his eyes on the ceiling. I didn't plan this, he continued, but I don't want to ignore it either. A long pause stretched between us. I haven't either, I finally said. Not like this. Not with someone like you. He smiled. Just a little, barely a twitch at the corners of his mouth, but it was there. We didn't move for a long time. Eventually, he rolled onto his side to face me. His expression was unreadable at first, then softened. His hand reached up, hesitated, then gently rested on my cheek. His thumb brushed under my eye, a slow, quiet gesture. Then, without a word, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't forceful, it wasn't fast. It was soft, hesitant, almost reverent, like he was afraid to break something fragile. I kissed him back. That moment felt suspended in time, like the world had gone still, and we were the only two people in it. When he finally pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine. I don't know what this means, he whispered. Me either, but I want to find out, I nodded. Okay. We fell asleep like that. Bodies close, his arm draped over my waist, my face pressed against his chest. There was no tension, no second guessing, just a strange, quiet peace. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. He was already in the kitchen, shirtless, flipping strips of bacon like this was just another Saturday. Morning, he said when I walked in. Morning, I replied, rubbing sleep from my eyes. He poured me a cup of coffee without asking. You sleep okay? I nodded, sitting at the kitchen table. Yeah. You? He shrugged, a grin tugging at his mouth. Better than I have in months. We didn't talk about the kiss. Not yet, but we didn't have to, because everything had changed, and we both knew it. The next 36 hours passed in this strange, suspended reality. We didn't talk about what was happening between us, but we didn't ignore it either. Every moment felt like it had a layer underneath. Every glance, every brush of the hand, every time we passed each other in the hallway. It was all loaded, but somehow it didn't feel heavy. It felt real. The day before Mom was due back, we spent most of the afternoon outside. Mark was working in the yard, shirt off, sweat glistening on his shoulders. I was pretending to be helpful, raking leaves just for the sake of it. Every time he glanced at me, something tightened in my chest. Around sunset, he tossed me a beer from the cooler. Sit, he said, motioning to the steps of the back porch. I joined him, the two of us facing the fading light, the sky streaked with orange and purple. You ever think about how we're gonna explain this? I asked. He exhaled slowly. Every minute. What are we doing, Mark? He stared out at the yard. I think I'm falling for you. The words knocked the wind out of me. I don't know what that makes me, he added, or what happens next, but I'm not pretending it didn't happen. I looked over at him, my beer forgotten. You're not just confused? He shook his head. No, I was, but not anymore. He turned to face me, eyes steady. You're the only person who makes me feel like I can breathe. My throat felt tight. I didn't say anything right away. I just nodded, setting the bottle down and leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around me without hesitation, pulling me closer. It was quiet. Safe. Later that night, after dinner and another movie we barely watched, he He didn't wait for me to go to bed. He followed me into my room, closed the door behind him, and sat on the edge of my bed like he had the first night. Except this time, he wasn't drunk. And he didn't hesitate. I stood in front of him, unsure what to do. The room was quiet. The weight of everything sat between us. He looked up at me, eyes serious. "If you tell me to leave, I'll leave. But if you don't..." I didn't let him finish. I stepped forward, took his face in my hands, and kissed him. This time it wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was real, and messy, and full of everything we hadn't said. We didn't rush anything. There was no panic, no performance. Just hands, lips, breath. Two men trying to figure out what the hell this was, while knowing, deep down, they didn't want it to stop. We eventually lay tangled under the covers, facing each other in the dim light of my desk lamp. "I'm not afraid," I said quietly. "Neither am I." There was a long pause before he whispered, "We'll figure it out." And somehow, I believed him. We didn't sleep much that night. Not because we were doing anything wild, but because neither of us wanted to waste a second. We stayed up talking in low whispers under the covers like teenagers sneaking around even though the house was empty. He told me about his first marriage, how young he'd been, how lost. I told him about my first crush and how I'd never told anyone, not even my closest friends. We traded secrets, insecurities, quiet truths. Somewhere between 2 a.m. and sunrise, he reached for my hand again and kissed the back of it like it was instinct. By the time morning rolled around, reality started knocking. Mom was due back that afternoon. We didn't say it out loud, but both of us felt it. The clock ticking. The real world pushing in on the bubble we'd been floating in for the past 2 nights. He helped me make breakfast like nothing had changed. Like he wasn't the man who had crawled into my bed 2 nights in a row and whispered that he was falling for me. But I saw it in the way he watched me move around the kitchen, and the way his hand lingered just a second too long on my back as he passed behind me. The goodbye was quiet. She called when she was 10 minutes away, and he gave me this look, serious, uncertain. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "You?" He smiled, small but real. "No, but I'm gonna figure it out." We didn't hug. We didn't kiss. We just stood there, 2 men who had shared something unspeakably intimate, pretending to be casual again. But as he walked out of my room, he paused at the doorway and turned back. "I meant everything I said," he told me. Then he left. And just like that, the moment was over. The rest of the day passed like nothing had happened. My mom came home, hugs were exchanged, bags were unpacked, small talk filled the air. Mark played the part perfectly, cheerful, steady, husbandly, but something had changed. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling. The silence felt different now. He didn't come in. And yet, I didn't feel abandoned, because I knew this wasn't the end. A few days later, I found a note tucked inside one of my sketchbooks, one I kept on my desk. It was short, just 5 words, scribbled in his handwriting. "When you're ready, I'm here." And that was enough, because whatever we were, whatever we had started, wasn't over, not even close.